Hi everyone, today I'm gonna talk you about the Cuban Missile Crisis that has happened in 1962. So, the questions that I will answer through my presentation these are: what was the background to the events in Cuba? How successful were all attempts at containment? Why was the USSR interested in helping Cuba? What happened during the October crisis? What was the outcome of the crisis? So, let's go. So, what was the background to the events in Cuba? So, why? What was the real reason? Cuba, it is commonly known, it is a small island in 160 kilometers from the coast of Florida. It is considered as a U.S. ally, U.S. business and U.S. military base. In 1959, Fidel Castro overthrew the previous President Batista and established a communist government in Cuba. Then, how successful were all attempts at containment? Fidel Castro takes over U.S. businesses. In some reasons, it was considered the Fidel Castro as an against U.S. government, as an against the Cuba and U.S. relations. In January 1961, U.S. breaks off diplomatic relations with Cuba. On April 1961, Bay of Pigs, 1,400 anti-Cuban exiles attempted to overthrow Castro, and in this time the U.S. committed $100 million to overthrowing Castro. And in autumn in 1962, Cuba has received 1,000 of USSR missiles, jets, boats, and personnel. And here, the USSR, at that time, he was one of the great powers of the world, and the state wanted to support Cuba, support military against US struggle. So, here's the question: why was the USSR interested in helping Cuba? Cuba was a new communist state, as USSR also at the time was a communist, and there were somehow common interests between two countries. So Cuba provided a launch base for USSR intercontinental missiles. Khrushchev wanted to test strength of new US president. Khrushchev at the time was the head of USSR. Khrushchev wanted to force UFK into a bargaining over US missile in Europe. And 14 October 1962, US U-2 spy plane takes photos of suspected USSR missile sites on Cuba. Here's the start of the October crisis. Sites nearing completion, experts believe they could be ready in 7 days. 15 October, next day, US spy planes identified 20 Soviet ships bound for Cuba carrying missiles. And on 20 October, John Kennedy, at that time he was the President of the United States, decided to blockade Cuba. On the 22 October, Kennedy publicly calls on Khrushchev to remove weapons. On the next day, 23 October, Khrushchev refuses to acknowledge blockade or presence of Soviet missiles on Cuba. And the next day, on 24 October, first Soviet ships accompanied by submarine approach 800-kilometer exclusion zone. And on 24 October, in the morning, 10:32 a.m., Soviet ships stopped and turned around. 24 October, aerial photos show continued construction of missile sites. Next day, 26 October, John Kennedy receives another letter offering to negotiate over missiles in Cuba with removal of blockade and U.S. invasion threat. And here, the United Nations Security Council and General Assembly played a role, and here is included this United Nations involvement to solve this problem between two powers like United States and USSR. On 27 October, John Kennedy received a second letter calling for withdrawal of U.S. missiles in Turkey too. At that time, there were missiles from U.S. in Turkey. And on 27 October, U.S. U-2 plane shot down over Cuba and pilot killed. Kennedy decided to ignore second letter, but accepted terms of first letter. 28 October, Khrushchev agrees to dismantle Soviet missiles in Cuba. and the negotiations and both were successful. And here's the last question: what was the outcome of the crisis? So first, Cuba remained communist and heavily armed without nuclear missiles, and it was really successful because at that time this crisis shows that there could be third world war or maybe nuclear world war in the world. Both leaders didn't lose faith and came away with concessions. Helped renew the world saw the futility of MAD, permanent hotline between White House and Kremlin set up. However, it was not set up, and it continues. It was continued through Cold War, but it was stopped in the previous decade, and supported theory of containment coexistence because alternative is unimaginable. So here's the theory of coexistence. Every country in the world are interdependent. They need to coexist. Every country in the world cannot exist by itself. All the countries in the world are interdependent, and they all need to coexist. They need to cooperate. They need to negotiate for the welfare of its population. If there will not be select this negotiation, there will be a nuclear power or some struggle again two powers, and the harm and the damage will be only to the innocent people, innocent population of Cuba. And this was the lessons that were taken from this crisis. Thank you for your attention. You can write your questions on comments on the below, and I would love to answer. Thank you for your attention.